So thank you all for joining me today, especially since we did change the date for this one. So those of you that could make it today, I'm really glad to see you. And I hope that none of us have issues connecting with the thunderstorms going on. So just to give you an overview of the structure here today, there's going to be a little bit of lecturing. It's going to get a little bit academic, which is not how I usually like to do things, but I think it would be useful to have some shared concepts and some techniques that we're all looking at. And then we'll do a little bit of literary analysis, nothing too deep, no wrong answers, just your first impulse. And then we'll do some generative writing. As we go through the course, I know some people can't come off mute because they're still at work or have other reasons, but I always love when people volunteer to read out loud, especially when we're looking at a text together, or if you're comfortable sharing your own work. So if you're willing to do that as that moment arrives, I appreciate you in advance. Okay, can everybody see my slideshow? Should say Ekphrasis in all senses on your screen. Great, thank you, nodders. I appreciate you. Okay, so if you're here, odds are pretty good that you have encountered, I think it's pronounced Ekphrasis, but we're all doing our best. You've probably encountered this term before. You may have even taken a workshop based in it. It's a pretty popular generative prompt to do Ekphrasis based on writing inspired by art, which is certainly one of the ways it can be interpreted, but we're going to be taking it in a little bit of a different direction today. So just to kind of go over some basics to make sure that we are sharing the same vocabulary here. Ekphrasis is a Greek word. It comes from the word meaning to tell out or to speak out. And when it first came into use, it was a rhetorical technique in ancient Greece. So this is something where if you were learning to become a public speaker or a rhetorician, you might learn this tool for the purposes of helping persuade others. So you might see Ekphrasis in public speaking. You'd very commonly see it in something called an ekphrastic epigram, which is a little piece of commentary on public art or something out in the world. And you do see it in epic poetry. One of the most common examples that people know of is the description of the shield of Achilles in the Iliad. So lots of different examples, some of them having to do with art, but not all of them. So here's a couple of quotes for you from people writing in this antique period. We've got Theon, who's the writer of one of those rhetoric manuals that you might receive when you're learning how to become better at this. And he says, Ekphrasis is a descriptive speech that brings the thing shown vividly before the eyes. But just to reiterate, that thing could be art, but it could also be a battle. It could be a location. It could be a season. So lots of different options for subject matter here. And around the same time, we've got Longinus, who's kind of analyzing the use of this tool. And he says, what then is the effect of rhetorical visualization? There it is much it can do to bring urgency and passion into our words, but it is when it is closely involved with factual arguments that, as well as persuading the listener, it enslaves him. So Longinus was very concerned that Ekphrasis has the power to make people feel things that they might not otherwise feel, although some of us might feel like that's our job as writers. So I just wanted to give you those points to keep in mind as we go along. When you get to the 18th and 19th century, you start to see examples of Ekphrasis more often describing artwork. And I wanted to quote this scholarly book by Timothy Morton. He's talking about 18th century literature, and he's writing about actually how the spice trade kind of influenced writing at that time. And he says, Ekphrasis usually refers to the attempt to describe visual art using verbal art, the attempt of language to thrust itself forth, as it were, into three-dimensional space and appear as a painting or a stone. So you can see a couple of things going on there. One is this contrast between something that is verbal and something that is spatial, and we're going to revisit that. And we also see this thing that Longinus was worried about, that Ekphrasis is something pretending to be something that it isn't, trying to make you feel something that isn't there. And he also says ekphrasis usually refers to visual art, but he's actually going to go on in this book to use it to describe talking about spices and how they evoke senses of smell and taste. And that's one of the things we're going to do today as well. And then just one final kind of talking point here. In the 20th century, you start to see imagists very preoccupied with visualization and imagery, and even some writers who felt that the poem or the writing itself should be an artwork or an object. And I love this poem, Ars Poetica by Archibald Maliche. These are the first and last lines here. A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit. A poem should not mean, but be. And I just love this idea of a poem that is somehow silent. How does that work? And it also takes up space. And that's one of the things we'll be thinking about. Like, how can you make something that you experience by reading on a page or hearing out loud? How can that take up space? So for the purposes of this workshop today, we're talking about writing techniques or ekphrastic writing techniques. We're talking about that which uses techniques for spoken or written text, which is something that is experienced over time, to evoke sensations such as sight, texture, and movement, which are experienced in space. So writing is something we experience temporally. Either you're sitting and maybe you're moving, maybe you read while you walk around, my partner does, but mostly you're in one place and the narrative is moving through time while you exist in one place in space. Whereas if you were going to go to an art museum, you would be moving around, kind of interacting with objects. So I hope that contrast makes sense, even though we're immediately going to mess it up and complicate it. So let's do a little reading. I would love if someone would read The Word Plum by Helen Chasson out loud. And apologies to those of you who have taken a workshop with me before. It's not your first time seeing this poem, but it makes such a good example. I couldn't resist using it again. Anyone willing to read?
I can read.
Oh, thanks, Amy Beth. I'd love for you to.
The word plum. The word plum is delicious, pout and push, luxury of self-love and savoring murmur, full in the mouth and falling like fruit, taut skin, pierced, bitten, provoked into juice and tart flesh, question and reply, lip and tongue of pleasure.
Really beautiful reading. Thank you for that. So I'd like for you all to kind of speak back to this poem now that you've heard it read out loud. And I'd love to invite you to comment in the chat. I'm having a little trouble seeing the chat. I'm going to work on that. Oh, I think I've got it. Perfect. Okay, great. Now I can see you if you talk to me in the chat. So either by coming onto your mic or by posting in the chat, what are your impressions? How did this poem feel to you while you were hearing it? There's no wrong answers here, just your thoughts.
Well, I think one thing is the alliteration, pout and push, self and savoring, and the use of the different verbs, pierced, bitten, provoked. It's getting inside you. So that's a very powerful image.
Great. So you actually did us the favor of pointing out a technique as well. There's a lot of alliteration in this poem, and also the word choice that she's using here are kind of they're contributing to your sensory impressions of this poem. In the chat, Amy Beth says, delicious in the mouth to read out loud. I feel the same way. It's one of the reasons why I love this poem. Let's jump off of that word delicious and talk about what are the senses that you see evoked by this. Well, see is really not the right word. What senses are evoked by this poem? Again, chat is a great place to respond, or you can pop off mic.
think the sense of taste is evoked. I mean, you can almost feel the fruit, the plum juicing in your mouth as it's pierced and bitten, and the juice and the tart flesh. You can feel that sensation in your mouth watering as you're reading it.
Thank you, Miriam. That's really wonderful. I love that. While talking about taste, you also couldn't help but talk about texture and how it felt in the mouth, the juiciness of it. And in the chat here too, we've got taste and touch. Touch in terms of the top skin, the sense of the words pierced and bitten, both give you a sense of texture as well. Push, these are all really great observations. And then again, we can keep going with senses because I truly think there are some more here. But we can also talk about what are the ways this author evokes those senses. And Ellen gave us a great one with the alliteration. Do you notice anything else going on here? And we're going to talk more about technique, so this is sort of cheating to ask you in advance, but just off the top of your head, what is she doing to create these sensory impressions? Do you all think of the pacing of this poem? Would you say it was a fast poem or a slow poem? How did it sound when Amy Beth read it? Okay, I've got chat's saying slow. Chat's also saying there's a lot of active verbs here, which is true. Really fantastic verbs that do a lot of work to show both texture, as you all noticed, and also movement. Great. MJ says there's a lot of momentum, even though it's so minimal.
Each line flows into the next also.
There's a
Doesn't
sense of
stop.
flow. That's great. Yes, okay. I feel like we're starting to get warmed up here because these are some really fantastic observations from all of you. I want to add just a couple of things here before we move on. By talking a little bit more about the specific sounds that we hear repeated a lot. We're absolutely right. There's alliteration here. Specifically, we're talking about these plosives, right? We've got pout, push, pierced, provoked. Like your lips are doing a lot of work while you read this poem. And even the word plum itself, your tongue's getting involved in there. You've got the push of the lips, the pout and the push, just as she describes. You've got this sense of pushing your tongue toward the front of your mouth to say plum. And then when you get to the M, it's this kind of vibration of satisfaction. So saying the word plum and hearing it in this poem almost kind of mimics the act of biting into a plum, which I find really, really fascinating. So in this poem that's so focused on sounds, we had a really wonderful time with sound here. We've got images of biting into a plum, and we've got sensations and textures of biting into a plum. And then to speak to the movement, we've got some words that suggest what movements are happening here. We've got falling like fruit. We've got biting into the tart flesh. But we also have, it's not fast, as you all notice. It's unhurried. You're really supposed to luxuriate while you read it. So there's so much in the structure of these words on the page that tells us how the poet wants us to experience this sense of eating a plum, or even just saying the word plum. She's making us feel something in multiple senses at one time. I also love in the chat, we've got some observations: pout and push, answer and reply. There's a little bit of a duality there, the sense of push and pull. That's also a kind of movement that again, I think slows the poem down. It doesn't just drive forward. It just kind of, moves around. Luxury, great observations. So this poem is just going to be a good example that we can return to while we talk about these techniques in more detail. So we're starting off with sound because sound, like text, is something that we usually experience unfolding over time. It's a temporal sensation. Sound is not something we necessarily experience in space, although again, we're going to complicate that immediately. But you have, as a writer, so many tools and techniques of sound to help you evoke different sensations in your writing. We talked about alliteration. We talked a little bit about specific examples of that, and I give a couple more here. There's the plosives at the bottom of this list. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. But plosives really make your lips and mouth do a lot of work. So it's just kind of calling attention to the movement of the mouth in a way that's interesting. Sibilance is another kind of alliteration. When you have a lot of S's and SH and Z sounds, you have a sense of hissing or hushing. So those are all great examples of sound. Onomatopoeia fits in here. Words that look the way they sound, like wow and whoosh and things like that. So these are all tools you can use. But we also talked about how fluid that poem sounded. We talked about its musicality and how it seemed to flow. We talked about its pacing, how it was not fast, moving slow, unhurried, luxuriating. I think someone in the chat pointed out. We can talk about rhythm. Rhythm can be regular or irregular. It can be smooth and flowing, or it can be choppy and jagged. And when we talk about pacing and rhythm, we're talking about sound, but we're also sort of talking about movement. And we're already kind of thinking about how things exist in space when we talk about sound in this way. So when you're writing, the way you control the pacing and the rhythm of your work is also a way how you can control how the reader perceives its movement and how it might move in the world. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit more theory. Again, a little bit of academia here. I want you to do an experiment for me. I did not make it up. I got this out of a book. And this is the experiment. We've got these two shapes over here on the right, these kind of maroon shapes here. And in the experiment, one of these shapes is called Kiki, and one of these shapes is called Booba. Those are both made up words for the purposes of this experiment, but your job is to tell me in the chat or off your mic if you prefer, which of these shapes do you think should be called Kiki? Is it the blob or the star? What do you think? Starting to get some feedback in the chat. Okay, pretty much unanimous coming through. People are saying it's the star. It's the second one. This one is Kiki. And those of you who said so are in agreement with the vast majority of people who completed this study across languages, across different parts of the world. What the research found out from using this experiment is that people really kind of associated the sound of the word Kiki with this sort of spikiness of the shape, and the sound of the word Booba, again, completely made up word, but with this kind of rounder, softer shape. We're going to get a little bit more into why, but I wanted to give you this quote from the book that I pulled it from, The Language of Food by Dan Jurafsky, because he's kind of talking about a set of tools that you can put to use as a writer. Something about our senses of taste and smell, vision and hearing are linked at least enough so that what is smooth in one is associated with being smooth in another, so that we feel the similarity between sharpness detected by smell, as in cheddar, sharpness in touch or vision, like acute angles, and sharpness detected by hearing, such as abrupt changes in sound. We can see this link between senses even in our daily vocabulary. The words sharp and pungent both originally meant something tactile and visual, something that feels pointy or subtends a small visual angle, but both words can be applied to tastes and smells as well. So this kind of gives you a preview of some of the next techniques we're going to look at, which is that you can sort of cheat by using words that sound and look like one thing to evoke textures and tastes and smells, because we kind of experience them on multiple registers. So adding to the techniques that we've already discussed, with shape and texture. Just to be a little bit more specific, Jarofsky says that it's the front vowels, those that are produced by holding the tongue high in the mouth. Again, we're kind of really focusing on how your mouth moves when you are reading out loud, but we also kind of internalize these things when we're reading silently. So words like cheese, thin, mint, and Triscuit tend to be used in words that refer to small, thin, light things. Jarofsky actually went on in this book to do a survey of snack foods, and he found out that pretty much everything that had a name like Triscuit or Ritz or chicken and a biscuit, those are all crackers. And then words that snacks that had words like Jamocha almond fudge, which I think was the Baskin Robbins flavor. Those are things that are creamy and smooth like ice cream. So words that use back vowels, things that you produce in the back of your throat, words like large and mocha and brownies, these all kind of suggest things that are bigger or fatter or heavier. So again, the word choices that you make do more than just suggest, what you mean. They do more than just have definitions. They also have these kind of sensory connotations that you can be thinking about as you write. And the same thing works for smell and taste. Tie the sense to the texture. Is it crisp or is it creamy? Is it jagged or is it juicy? I loved that someone in the first poem said that the poem felt juicy in their mouth. And I think that's because of all of the kind of movement of the mouth while you were saying it and the different kinds of consonants and vowels that it was using. Notice that other words like nice and knife kind of impact your nose. They have nasalization in them. They're also front vowels to go back to Jarofsky's theory. So again, just thinking about the sound of language while you're writing. So let's do another reading together, just so we can apply some of these things in action. This is a much shorter poem. It's one of my all-time favorites. Would anybody be willing to read it out loud? No Margaret Atwood fans in the group?
Yep. You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye.
Nice. Thanks, Anne Ellen. So once again, I'm going to ask you just to respond with your gut feelings to this little poem. How did it feel to hear it? What did this poem make you feel? No wrong answers, just first impressions.
It's I find it very unsettling. First of all, I just say I've had numerous eye surgeries. So like a hook in an eye, a fish hook in an open eye, like, ugh,
That is a really powerful visual. You're absolutely right. And you can see that we're starting to get a little bit more into imagery with this poem. I didn't want to leave imagery out while we talk about ekphrasis. So yeah, really vivid image, fish hook, open eye. Anybody notice any of the other senses that are evoked here apart from vision? Oh, great. Amy Beth says contrast of sharp and round in image and sound. And I'm just going to reiterate those last two lines that Anne Ellen read so beautifully. A fish hook. We were just talking about those front vowels. A fish hook is a phrase that just sounds sharp. An open eye, back vowels. Sounds open, sounds soft and vulnerable. Nice. We've got a lot of senses. We've got smell, sight, taste, touch. We've also got movements and our sense of space, as we were talking about. Any other sensory impressions you all get? How about the pacing with this one?
I felt like it went kind of right to the point.
Oh, pun intended, yes or no? All right, great. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that, Loan? I love that phrasing, but I just want to give you a chance to put it in your words.
I guess it. I don't know. It felt so precise. You know, it captured such a precise emotion, and there's not much. You know, at its essence, I feel like I got the feeling and the idea too.
Yeah. You make a really good point. There's not a lot here. This is a really short poem, and two of the words appear more than once. So, with very few words, Margaret Atwood does evoke a really specific feeling, and it does get right to the point, both because it's short and it just doesn't meander. It goes right there. I'm also going to suggest that the pacing plays with that a little bit. And I'll tell you something I noticed about it, which is one of the reasons why I love this poem so much. If you only looked, go ahead and cover, I'm doing this on my screen, you can't see me. If you cover up the bottom two lines for a minute and just look at the top two, right? They kind of lilt. They're a little sing-songy, almost iambic, not exactly, but you fit into me like a hook into an eye. Melodic almost, kind of carries you along. It almost sounds like it could be the beginning of a romantic poem. We fit together so well, just like that hook at the top of my dress. Such a perfect match. And then you get to the next two. So I'm taking my hand away to uncover them. A fish hook, an open eye. It's so final. The rhythm changes so much in those last two lines. And they kind of thud, this poem stops. It does not drift away. This is an ending. And there's a little bit of almost a bait and switch with the way the first two lines set up almost a joke. And then the last two lines are like the punchline, although as Ellen pointed out, it's not very funny. No one wants to have a hook in their eye. Great. Is this an ekphrastic poem? Not really, that would be a stretch, but it uses some of the techniques we've talked about so purposefully, so intentionally, getting right to the point, as Lowen said, that I just felt like it would be a great example to have bouncing around in your brain while you're thinking about what you want to write about for the generative writing prompt, which is what I think we're going to get to next. Oh, no, a few more techniques. So thinking about vision, because for a lot of us, ekphrastic writing is kind of rooted in a tradition of focusing on vision. So I don't want to leave that out. I just wanted to leave it for last. When you're writing, you of course have access to vivid description. No one will take that away from you. You can write all the vivid scenes that you want. But you've also got use of how you use white space on page, or how you arrange things typographically, where you choose to cut the lines if you're a poet, or if you choose to write a very short poem, getting right to the point, as you guys just said, or if you sprawl, if you take up more room, if you kind of stretch things out. Like, these are all ways of conveying a sense of space and movement, as well as how things look. When you are describing something, if you were doing kind of the traditional ekphrastic writing where you describe a painting, you have a lot of choices about, where do you start? What do you look at first? So you have the option to follow the eye's movement while I go. I'm sorry to talk about eyes after this poem, but you have to think about, are you looking from top to bottom when you're describing an object or a setting? You're looking from left to right. Are you zooming in or zooming out first? So many choices there. If you're describing something that exists out in space where it's not hanging on a wall like a painting, how does your body move around it? Or is it something that you can hold and that you're moving around and manipulating with your hands? You can do, as we just discussed with the Kiki and Buba experiment, and tie vision to a sense of texture. Is the object rough or smooth or sharp? Because that's going to be something your reader experiences, not just visually, but also texturally, and possibly in their taste and smell as well. And I just wanted to add on here, is the emotion connected to this object rough or smooth or sharp? As you all pointed out, that was a very sharp emotion in the Margaret Atwood poem, conveyed both through the length and the pacing and the sounds of the very few words that she chose and the image that she chose comes across very sharply. You can tie your sense of vision to your sense of rhythm or pacing. Does it stop suddenly? Does your writing stop suddenly? That's what I'm talking about. Does it drift away at the end? Is it compact or is it sprawling? Is it heavy or is it light? These are all things you can control as a writer that kind of influence how the reader perceives what you're describing on the page. Does anybody have any questions before we move on, or anything you just wanted to follow up on?
Yeah, I had a question about pacing.
Yeah.
Is it generally associated that like more words mean you slow down the pace and less words you quicken it, or is there something else happening there?
The answer, aggravatingly, as with so many things in writing, is it depends. We experienced that Margaret Atwood poem is very quick, partly because it was very short, but also because the words themselves were very short. They're small words, uses no long words in that poem. And also because of the rhythm of the sentences. So that first two lines, as I described, a little bit more lilting and slow. Second two lines, like rocks falling off of a cliff. The first poem we read, The Word Plum, not very long, pretty short poem, but reading it, we tended to slow down and take our time, partly because of the sounds of those words, and also because of the way she broke up the lines on the page. And I think also because of the content. It was a poem about pleasure, and we weren't in a hurry to read it. So I guess the too long didn't read version, to answer your question, it's not just the length or how many words are on the page, but the rhythm of them, the sound of them, the length of the words, as well as the length of the sentences. You may have been told in the classroom, for example, to vary the length of your sentences in a paragraph. It's like, one long sentence and then maybe a short sentence, and just kind of mix it up. And that is pretty good advice generally, just to avoid, your reader becoming disengaged. Too many short sentences sounds staccato. Lots of long sentences can get kind of, dense and lugubrious. But sometimes that's the sensation you are trying to achieve. And I just like for you as a writer to know that you have those options in front of you. There's not going to be one best way. It's going to depend on your content. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Great. That was a really good question, by the way. Any other questions from the group? All right, let's do some writing. So for this exercise, and if we have time, we'll do another exercise, but this is the one I really want to focus on today. We'll call it the object exercise. I want you to choose an object, any object that exists in physical space. So it can be something that you see on your desk in front of you. I always hate prompts that start with choose something on your desk in front of you, because all I've got is a pen and a chapstick, and I don't want to write about those. So you can look out your window, you can think about what's in your kitchen, you can remember what was in front of you at a really fun party you went to this weekend. You can, go more wild than that. So I give you some examples here: a slice of pie, a garden, a bed sheet, a telephone wire, a bird. These are all objects that exist in space very differently from each other, and that we perceive with different sets of senses, usually more than one sense for each of them. So choose your object. And I want you to take a little time. I put 30 seconds here, but you know what? Let's take a minute. We're not in a hurry. Take a minute to jot down the characteristics of that object. How does it look? How does it sound? How does it feel? How does it taste or smell? How does it move or take up space? So go ahead on your notebook, or if you have a Google document open, as I often do, make those notes on your object. All right. Let's take what you started with there, and we're going to move on to the timed portion here. For the next few minutes, let's say 5 minutes sometimes feels like a really long time and sometimes like not enough time. So we'll just see where we're at today. I want you to write your preferred style of writing. Could be poetry, could be fiction storytelling, nonfiction storytelling, just reflective writing, description, whatever feels comfortable to you. I want you to write in the manner of that object. I don't want you to describe the object. You might end up describing it, but that's not the purpose of this exercise. I want you to try to embody that object with your writing. So if you chose a slice of pie for your object, how could you write a story that feels juicy, the way that the word plum felt juicy, or maybe that feels creamy? What would a poem or a story feel like if you felt like you could sink a fork into it? If you chose a bed sheet, is it, clean? First of all, is it even clean? And then what would a poem sound like that had the sensation of covering or draping? It's kind of a conceptual question to ask yourself, but you have a lot of techniques you can pull from to help you do this exercise. And I'm going to put in the chat, I made a Google Doc for you guys. You are welcome to make a copy of this and keep it. In fact, if you think you might want to reference it at any point, I encourage you to make a copy because I have to clean out my Google Drive at some point. So if you scroll down to just a few pages in that Google Doc, I've got all of the techniques that we just talked about kind of spelled out in one place you can put in front of you. So I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to go on mute. And I want you to write for 5 minutes in the manner of the object that you chose, trying, if you can, not to mention what the object is at all. Go forth. Enjoy. Okay, that was 5 minutes. That felt fast to me. I don't know how it felt for you. So we're a small group today. Just to keep in mind if you're open or not sure on the fence about sharing. Is anybody willing to read their work out loud? Or a part of your work that you wrote just now? I also love it when people share in the chat, but since we've spent so much time talking about sound today, I'd really love to hear you do it out loud, if possible. And Ellen? Amazing, thank you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna hold this up. I don't know if you can see this. These are one of my pairs of glasses that I need to get through the day. And I'm not sure if this is exactly fitting the assignment. The round green rim surrounding the shaped and shaded glass, hard and firm to hold its place, following the head as it moves throughout the day. A miraculous marvel of optics and chemistry lighting my way.
So some of the things I noticed from that is, especially in those opening lines, you were paying so much attention to the sounds of the words that you chose to describe it. I could hear that in the way you were reading it.
Yeah,
too.
I was trying to play with that. It's definitely overkill, but I was playing with it.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I'm going to go ahead and we can keep talking about your work for a second, but I always like to do a little bit of reflection after we write, because I think it's important to talk about how it feels while we're writing. And Alan, you mentioned it felt like overkill to you. I'm always curious when techniques feel good, like when they feel like a good stretch, or when they feel like you're straining or you're overcompensating. So how would you describe this assignment for you?
Well, this was a stretch, and when you play with something, it's wrong. What I do is I have to read it out loud while I'm walking, like sort of pacing and getting a rhythm and figure out, what's wrong. I mean, clearly it's trite, round rim shaped and shaded, to me, it was just a real challenge to describe an object and use it as almost a personification.
Yeah. I can understand that. I'm also really interested in your technique of reading out loud while walking. That's so interesting. It's going to tie back to one of the prompts I have to offer for later. So one of the things that a word I would have used to describe your writing is playful. To me, it sounded kind of fun. The round rims and the alliteration you were playing with, it sounded like you were having fun with language. And that came through. So I think as an experiment, or making me feel something, you definitely made me feel that you were trying something new. Very persuasive rhetorical technique. Anyone else interested in sharing now that we've prepared the ground for you?
I can share.
Oh, I would love that. Go ahead.
I dangle beneath my own shade, elongated almond, moon crescent, with inverted craters, bumps, blistering with roundness, pointy head and toes, the color of brief summer, joy. I bring joy. It brings joy to my mom. She experiments with it, unafraid, sharing generously its harvest. How many summer days it lives on, each summer an evolution of the grower. The house can always change as long as I have sun and rain. Summer's favorite bitter fruit that gets only sweeter on my journey.
That was really beautiful reading, by the way. So Luan, my sound was cutting out a little bit, and I didn't catch. Did you say the name of your object in the poem?
No,
Okay,
I
good,
didn't.
good. That's good. So I love that, because I am now curious what folks think you were writing about. And you're welcome to guess in the chat, but we don't have to. We're not trying to make Luan feel self-conscious. But I got a sense of something hanging, something maybe turning in the air. I definitely felt a sense of weight in the object you were describing. Does that feel right?
Yeah, it's bitter melon. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that ingredient, but yeah, they dangle like kind of like cucumbers, but under vines.
That's great.
Yeah.
I would have guessed something growing. I wasn't sure if we were talking fruit or vegetable, but I think especially at the beginning when you were playing around with words like elongate and just like that sense of hanging and kind of moving heavily in the space like that, it definitely came across as something that was sort of heavy on a vine. So that was a really beautiful visual. I was also interested that you kind of shifted gears at one point and started kind of more into a storytelling mode and kind of zooming out and talking about, who's involved with this object and what's going on around it. So would you mind saying a little bit about what the writing process felt like for you?
Yeah, sorry, I got a little bit confused like with the personification because I think I switched point of views at some point. At first I kind of tried to inhabit what this object is from its own reference point, and then it led me through association to something very culturally meaningful. This is it's not something grown native here. It comes from Asia, in particular Vietnam for me, and it's something that not everyone can grow easily, and how much joy it brings to our family. So I think there was that I was figuring out to connect the sensory part to a broader story.
Yeah, I think that's a great move. Like for a generative prompt, the point is to get you writing, right? And kind of thinking about what choices you have when you're deciding what words to put on a page. And so I like that that's kind of what that turned into for you, more of a cultural story that's linked to like kind of the physical properties of this bitter melon. Thank you for sharing. I'm sensing a couple of people are like, oh, well, I wasn't sure if I got the assignment right. Don't worry, like you sat here on a Thursday afternoon and you got the assignment right. But just to kind of give you another example, I will read you one that I wrote in response to this prompt. I altered it for the workshop, but I came across a version of this prompt in a smoke long workshop, and I wrote this very short piece. It is kind of like Luan's, a little bit more of a story because that's my mode, and it was published in Capsule Stories a couple of springs ago, their spring issue. It goes like this. It's called False Spring. Imagine having something good simply because you want it. Imagine there is not a cloud in the sky, and just for today, the sunlight is so warm you can almost see it, soft and gold. And when you take off your cardigan, you can feel the light spreading on your skin as sugar coats the tongue. And you're walking to meet a friend, and you're on time for a change, and your chatter flows like cream, no gaps. And there are no leaves on the trees yet, so it's just sunlight and the warmth tentatively rising from the sidewalk the whole way. Imagine the effervescence you suddenly feel is not the simple chemistry of caffeine plus companionship plus exercise. Your neurons are practically snapping with glee. Walking has been a grim business this winter, but the natural order of things reasserting itself, a seasonal shift. And your laughter catches a little on the way out. You're a little rusty, but the pair of you can't seem to stop making jokes. Are you always this witty, or are you just warm enough for the first time your skin can remember? You keep taking little sips of it all. Even if the cotton of your mask feels like a new beginning. You want to inhale it all in so that your whole body lights up, but don't rush. Go slow. It's gone so fast. Does anybody want to take a guess at what my object was? My feelings won't be hurt if you guess wrong, I promise.
Coffee.
Oh my God, Miriam, it's like you read my soul. This workshop took place in lockdown, and there was nothing in my life that made me happy except that it was almost spring, and you know, I went and get this iced coffee with my friend as described, and I was like, how can I describe how good this makes me feel? So I tried to get the creaminess. I tried to get the rushing pace of like the caffeine kind of flooding your system. Thank you, Luan. I appreciate that. So she feels the heart palpitation excitement. That's what I was hoping for. So that's just another example of, you know, how thinking about how to embody, you know, sensations that occur in space, things that move, things that feel like warmth, things that have a flavor like coffee. Like you have all these different techniques to try to get that across, and the ones that are appropriate depend both on your preferences and on the subject, and you know, on your style. Okay, so we're running a little low on time, but I do encourage you to think about these reflection questions after having done this assignment today. You know, just how did it feel? What was hard about it? What was fun about it? You know, like what was interesting? Just so you're defining for yourself what your writing practice looks like. And then I have for you just a few more prompts to think about if you enjoyed kind of bending your mind in this way. The first one kind of calls back to what Anne Ellen was talking about earlier. Try while you're writing, putting yourself in a different physical space while you're writing. So you could take a notebook on a walk, like a flaneur, walking around the neighborhood. You could take it on a hike. You could sit in the pool. And let being in a different space that's not where you usually write inform how you write and how you think about movement and space and sense. You can take a bite of something, as Helen Chasten does in the word plum, and try to capture the taste, smell, and texture the way that she does. I think you have a lot of tools to do that, especially with all the alliteration and the mouth sensations that we spent time talking about today. And then the last two are variations on the object exercises that we discussed, but just try doing it in different ways. You know, what if you only had 10 words to describe your object? What if you tried it in a different mode than you did this time, verse instead of prose or vice versa? And then this one's fun because I love the Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but you know, 'twas brillig with the slithy toves. Like it's a poem full of made up words, but it still makes a kind of sense because we're still getting something from the way those words sound. So you can try to do something like that with an object using words that don't even really exist, like Kiki and Booba. What are the sounds you would play with to describe it? I just think that's a fun exercise. And that's it. That's all I've got. I do have that document for you on Google if you want to grab it for those prompts. And also if you want my sources that I used about Ekphrasis, those are listed in there as well. And then in any remaining minutes we have before Taylor asks us to leave, if you have any questions, let me know. Yes, so I'm on the Dying Star, formerly known as Twitter, and also on Blue Sky. And Taylor shared my website before, which is a good way to keep up with with what I'm doing while we all decide what social platform we want to live on now as a writing community. Thank you for asking. And thank you guys for sharing your thoughts and your impressions. This was a lot of fun. It always is. I love Blue Soup workshops. They're the best.
Thank you so much. This was great. You just packed an incredible amount into an hour.
Thank you. That's my style. Try to fit it all in.